Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining the Golden Gavel Speaker Showcase. I am John Lurquin, Marketing and Communications Director at Toastmasters International. I'm honored to moderate today's Q&A session. Please note that to ask a question, simply click the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Type in your question and hit send. We will do our best to get to as many questions as possible. We're honored to have with us the 2020 recipients of the Golden Gavel Award, Julian Treasure, author, entrepreneur, communication expert, and speaker. Julian, thank you for that wonderful presentation.
Thank you. I really enjoyed giving that to so many people who care about this subject.
I would like to start this Q&A session by asking you to tell us more about you and your work.
Well, I have been listening all my life. I'm a musician, a drummer, actually, and I've heard all the jokes about drummers. And so I had a long career in marketing where by day I was dealing with big brands and by night very often playing music. And if you play in a band, you have to listen to many different streams, all the other instruments. Same in an orchestra. So I think musicians listen in a sort of multi-channel, attentive way. And that certainly was true for me. So when I sold my contract publishing company, producing magazines for brands, I wanted to bring the two sides together. And that was something to do with brands and sound. And so the sound agency was formed, asking that question that Deepak mentioned, how does your brand sound? And we've been doing that for 17 years, ending up specializing in sound in physical spaces. And along the way, I got the chance to deliver those TED Talks. You know, I've been going to TED since 2003. And it was exciting to get the opportunity to stand on the stage in 2007 and then 4 more times. And the topic came not so much about organizational sound. I really started to focus on the sound we all consume and create, which is really speaking and listening. And that's very much what I care about now.
I understand you have a special offer for our convention attendees. Do you mind telling us a little bit more about that?
Yes, well, I talked about the importance of listening. I know that Toastmasters is so much about speaking and is a wonderful resource for anybody who wants to speak effectively in public or even one-to-one. Speaking is a crucial life skill, and so is listening. And as I said in the talk, they are intimately related. If you want to be a great speaker, you need to be a great listener. So in the talk, I went through what is listening and why does it matter and things to look out for that damage it or affect it. And I said at the end that I would give a webinar exclusively for Toastmasters, which we're going to do actually, we've just fixed the date after I was speaking, September the 3rd. It's going to be a webinar 1 hour long, exclusively for Toastmasters, to go through exercises, simple exercises you can do at home, anywhere, at work, in the car even, and which will really improve your conscious listening skills. So I'll be doing that, talking a little bit more about my TED Talk, I think, because I know people always ask me about that. So how did you do a TED Talk that's got, I don't know, 40 million, 50 million views, something like that? And also answering any more questions that people might have about those exercises and about how to improve listening. So that's the webinar. It's juliantreasure.com/Toastmasters, absolutely free of charge. I'm really delighted to give this gift to Toastmasters because I want to encourage everybody in the world. It's like dropping coins or pebbles in a pond, you know, the ripples really do spread out, and never have we needed listening more than we do at the moment.
Well, thank you for sharing that. Let's move on to our first question from the audience. During your presentation, you spent a lot of time talking about the balance between speaking and listening. This question is about contexts. How does context play a role, and how do you control the context?
Well, of course, you can't always do that, but you can, first of all, move. I think, you know, most people would recognize that you don't want to have a really important conversation, you know, proposing marriage or selling some incredibly important deal in a noisy cafe or next to somebody drilling in a road. You would naturally tend to avoid those. So it's along those lines. You can move I would also say plan. If you know that you're going to have an important conversation, then you can plan where to have it and think about the context. Is it going to be helpful? Will you be interrupted? Is there noise? How are the acoustics in the space? Is the person going to give you full attention? So planning is very, very important. If you're giving a talk, of course, which I've done all over the world for years, you can control to a degree by finding out all about the space in advance, by going and doing rehearsals, which I always do the day before, in case anything goes wrong, not the coffee break just before I speak. I've had that one before.
Sure.
So, you go and meet the crew, you get to be friends with the PA guys, and you kind of work it all so that you're in control of everything to the best you can be. The PA system might be rubbish. If that's the case, you'll need to adapt, but you'll have time to do that. So it's about planning, it's about movement if necessary, and it's about just being sensitive to it. If you start and the environment isn't helping you, then you can say to the person you're speaking to, like, I tell you what, then maybe there's a bit of time to do this. Or, yeah, I tell you what, let's just move over there and we can get a bit of peace and quiet. So being conscious is the key.
I'm seeing more questions come in about the balance between listening and speaking. Can you tell us a little bit more about how listening affects speaking?
Well, as I said at the beginning of the talk, the way you listen affects the way I speak. Less so when we're doing one-to-many like this and I can't see anybody. So I don't know how you're listening, hopefully all very attentively. Nevertheless, if I'm standing on a stage and I can see people, then absolutely I'm conscious of the listening there. And certainly when you're one-to-one, then even online, if you're doing a Zoom call with people and you can see them, then the way people listen affects the way you speak. If you're speaking to a bunch of people who are obviously doing something else, it's frustrating and you will have to work harder to gain their attention. You might have to use a trick or two. So being conscious of that, very important. Also, the way I speak affects the way you listen. And further, the way I speak affects the way you speak, because people tend to be in a dance where they're mirroring and matching each other in a conversation. And the way I listen affects the way you listen, and vice versa. So all of these elements are working in a circle the whole time. It's organic, it's dynamic. And I would suggest also, if you want to be listened to, it's a very, very good idea to become a good listener. And one of the exercises I'll do in the webinar is very much about this. You can deploy questions, but the more interested and engaged you are with somebody else, it will rub off and they tend to start mirroring you and becoming interested and engaged in you. So it is a crucial, dynamic, organic relationship, which requires, again, consciousness.
It is frustrating when the audience, whether it's one person or several, aren't listening. And I feel now that we're in this virtual environment, sometimes people think they can get away with multitasking. But to me, it is just as apparent. If someone isn't listening, I see their eyes gaze off the camera, their hands move over their keyboard. It's obvious. We have a question from a Toastmaster from Division E. How do you react when an audience member, whether it's one or several, aren't listening to you?
Well, I said you may have to use some tricks, and you can share with them the honest situation. Guys, I can see that some of you are really not listening and you're struggling to listen to me. What's the problem? Can we talk about this? So I think one of the biggest mistakes people make on stage is pretending things don't exist. So if there's a noise in a hall, I mean, many times I've spoken in hotel ballrooms where you can hear the person next door speaking just as loudly as me. I will talk about that. This is going to, guys, I'm delighted to be here. I'm excited to be talking to you. This is going to be challenging for me and for you because of this. It's so much more important to do that than to pretend it's not there. If I see a bunch of people, if I'm presenting at a meeting, for example, and people are disengaged, I'll just stop. Is it me? Is there something going on? Do we need to reschedule this? I need your attention for this. It's important and I'm not getting it. So what's the issue? So I would always say, in a charming, non-blaming, non-judgmental way, not frustrated, not angry, I would raise the issue, put it in front of you and them on the table and say, how can we solve this? I've got something to give you. It's important, something that you are going to benefit from.
Mm-hmm.
Clearly, that's not working at the moment. Let's talk about it.
A lot of Toastmasters members join Toastmasters to work with their nerves, especially in a public speaking context. And when we ask our members, what is your goal? Very often the goal is to be more relaxed in front of an audience, to be able to speak without feeling as nervous. Do you have any tips for the audience on how to deal with nerves?
Well, partly, of course, it comes from practice. I have an online course with 9 chapters, and the last one is all about public speaking. And I talk about PPD, practice, prepare, deliver, the 3 stages, which to me really form the backbone of giving a great talk. And the practice is what helps. You know, I've stood on so many stages around the world now that I never get nervous. I get excited, adrenalized, but pretty much everything that could happen to me has happened already, and I'm still here. So there's not much that I fear when I walk onto a stage. Now, of course, the first time you walk on, most people's fear is forgetting their lines, looking like an idiot, being derided by the audience, and so forth. Well, first of all, I've never seen that happen except maybe on open mic nights in comedy clubs. Most of the time, you're in a situation where people are keen to hear what you've got to say. I've seen TED speakers dry up on stage, you know, using memory, which is a high risk strategy. They dry up and they, you know, what happens? The speaker goes red, starts sweating, looks flustered and so forth. And what then happens? The audience start to clap. Almost inevitably, they're giving support. They're saying, yeah, don't worry, we're on your side, we're with you, it's okay. That's the feeling there is. Unless you're in a really hostile bear pit of an audience, that's what you will get. So there isn't so much to fear. That's the first thing to realize. Then the simple trick for calming nerves is breath. Breath. As you walk on stage, just take a really big, deep breath, which is the thing that, you know, if your voice goes a little bit like this when you're hello, everybody, you know, a big, deep breath will calm that right down. Breath is the fuel for your voice. It's what your voice is. And we tend to breathe just tiny little breaths most of the day. Take a big, deep one, and it'll really calm your nerves down. Even if you feel nervous, you won't sound nervous. And I'd say the final thing to realize, of course, is being nervous is good. It's your body giving you all the adrenaline and the fuel you need to do a great performance. So, you know, if you're not excited, at least adrenalized, there's probably something wrong. You're going to go on and give rather a dull performance, I would suggest, if you're not fully charged. So nerves, not your enemy, they're your friend.
I love that advice. As soon as you said, take a deep breath, I immediately did that and instantly felt better. I think we probably don't do that as often as we should throughout the day.
Absolutely.
There's a few questions here about TED Talks. Can you tell us a little bit about how you prepare yourself for a TED Talk and what goes into the preparation for that?
Well, yes, the TED audience is quite intimidating. You look out and, oh, there's Jeff Bezos. Oh, there's Larry Page. Oh, there's Bill Gates. So it's not your typical audience, and it is quite an intimidating thing. But as I've said, it's a very kind audience because they're there, they're paying a lot of money to be at TED physically, and they're there to listen. So you have an audience that's primed, expectant, really enthusiastic and engaged, which is much better than many audiences, you know, where you go on after lunch and they're a bit tired and you've really got to work it in order to get that engagement going. So I think that's the first thing to say about TED. But having said that, my first TED Talk, which was the one about the 4 effects of sound, nobody had ever used sound in a TED Talk before, and they were pretty excited about doing that. So we did quite a lot of rehearsing. TED are quite strong on that. They're much stronger now even than they were back in those days in 2007. These days, well, if TED ever happens again physically, which I hope it will, they work very carefully with the speakers. If you're selected to do a TED Talk, then they will work with you on Skype, rehearse, make sure that it's the right length, that the subject matter, the content is up to scratch. And then when you get there, you get coached in delivery. Not, as I said in my talk, not to the point where it's artificial, but to the point where you can do your best to deliver. You know, I asked Chris Anderson, who's the head of TED, the curator, I said, Chris, which do you think is more important, delivery or content? That's an interesting question, isn't it? And he said, if I had to choose, although they're both important, content every time. Because I can live with somebody who's giving a sort of fumbling delivery, but the content is earth-shatteringly important. I'll be with them. But if somebody is brilliantly delivering vapid nonsense, that's just annoying. And I think that's true. So content always has to come first. And that certainly was true of all my TED Talks. You know, I thought really carefully about the message. TED is about ideas worth spreading. And so you've got to have an idea that's worth spreading and then think very carefully about how to put it across. It needs to be really transformative to work on a TED stage. So that's some words about TED. It is scary.
I can only imagine. Before we invited the audience in, you and I were having a conversation about visual cues, presentation slides, things like that. This is a question from Cindy Wilson. What visual cues should you seek to ensure that the listener received and understood the message you spoke?
Well, I'm a big fan of slides. I've used them for many, many years in business. I mean, right back to when they were acetates on an overhead projector. And I love the combination of a powerful visual that is not bullets, a powerful visual, and also good sound. I'm a sound guy. So to me, I mean, I'm right there with Pythagoras, as I mentioned in the talk, you know, when he used to put screens up to stop people being distracted by the visual, by seeing the teacher. So I agree with that. I think sound, the human voice, is massively powerful. So I was perfectly happy being a tiny little picture up in the top right-hand corner when I was talking, with powerful slides, which are designed to give a multi-stream impression of the talk, so that you've got visual cues as well as auditory cues. I don't change that much when I'm speaking. I mean, I'm not a great performer. So although I'm hopefully quite expressive, it's the voice I want to get across. The slides do two things for me. They back me up with visual cues, which really amplify the message, and they're memorable. I hope everybody who saw that talk can remember several of the slides. At the same time, because I'm using Keynote on a Mac, I've got presenter view, so I know what's coming next. My memory is not the best, and this is the way I work. You know, it could be like cue cards. TV presenters have a stack of cue cards and they just turn them over and there's the next thing. So it takes away that fear of getting lost. I might overrun sometimes, try not to, but I do not get lost. Of course, if the technology goes down, you do need to know your subject matter as well. I mean, that's happened to me in the past, where everything breaks and you're on your own. That is somewhat more entertaining. But as long as you know what you're talking about, you know, it's very good to be the person who can carry on when everything else is in ruins around you. That's often very popular.
So it sounds like a tool such as a PowerPoint slide should be used to facilitate the communication, but maybe not overly reliant on a tool like that, especially if something goes wrong.
big time, and
Yep.
really not bullets. You know, I don't use them, and the temptation is if you put content onto slides, you'll turn around and start reading the slides with the audience, which is death. Do not ever do that. It's just rude, and you lose the audience. You become a member of the audience, not a speaker.
Right. How do you feel when there's too much text on a slide?
Yeah, that's death as well.
Right.
It's just tedious, because I mean, if you're going to say it powerfully, and pull out maybe one word that summarizes what you're saying, or a picture, which is what I try to do with my slides. They're very simple. They tend to have one word on them or a picture. I did use a couple of slides there which amplified what I was saying with a collection of items, but broadly speaking, they're pretty simple. And I think that works. The moment you get into text on slides, like it becomes what Gar Reynolds, who wrote the wonderful book, what's it called? It'll come back to me. It's a great book on visual aids. He calls them sliduments, which is a combination between a kind of leave behind and something you show on the screen. It's not good.
This is a question from Monica. How important is voice quality when communicating a message?
Very. I talked about the importance of content, and that is true, but it does not mean that we should not pay attention. And in my TED talk about speaking, I went through the vocal toolbox, which is immensely important to me. Some of the aspects of speaking, which people very rarely are conscious about, and they're really tools that you can pick out and use and become a master of. I mean, things like prosody or prosody, the way you inflect your voice, the pacing between the words, and absolutely timbre, or the feel of your voice, is significant. Now, if you don't have the kind of voice people like, which is, I always say it's like you would describe a hot chocolate, rich, dark, warm, smooth, sweet, all of those words, don't panic. Go get yourself a vocal coach. You know, one of the most amazing things to me when I go around the world speaking, you know, I could be speaking to an audience of 2,000 chief executives. I did this not so long ago in Copenhagen. And I asked the question, okay, you guys all speak. You lead teams, you stand on stages, you present your company. How many of you have had formal vocal training from a vocal coach? There's about 6. And that is shocking to me. You know, if speaking is important to you and you're doing Toastmasters, so it is, then why not get some vocal coaching as well? Especially if your voice, you know, it's a bit croaky like this or something. There's things you can do with breathing, with posture, with exercises, which a vocal coach will give you, which will change your timbre and improve it. So if it's a challenging thing for people to listen to, it's in your way, it's an obstacle. And I often see powerful speaking as removing the obstacles which are in between you and people receiving you effortlessly.
So you've made it clear. Vocal quality seems to be very, very, very important when communicating a message. A question from Aaron here is about nonverbal communication and gesturing. How do you incorporate nonverbal communication, body language in communicating a message?
Well, again, I think authenticity is really important. And so I would advise anybody against putting stuff in that's not naturally you. If you're a wild gesticulator and you love waving your hands when you're talking and so forth, that's great. Be like that. Make sure that you're conscious of it and that it's not a distraction, because again, it's about removing obstacles. If you're a quiet person who doesn't really gesticulate that much, don't start putting in crazy gestures just for the sake of it because somebody says you should do more, because it's not you, you know, and there would be an inauthenticity about that. It would look staged, posed, artificial. So if it comes from your core, then fine. And a lot of the work I do over the years I've done with people in coaching has been about extending range. You know, if you tend to gesticulate just a little bit like this, then there's nothing wrong with making it bigger like this. You know, you can't see my arms are right out here. big gestures are fine. And it is a common mistake, I think, to see people doing things small because they feel a bit bashful or shy or whatever it might be, lacking in confidence. Being confident and being fully expressed is great. So if you're going to do a gesture, that's fine. Make sure it comes really from you. And the biggest thing about gestures and about being on stage in general is to be fully conscious and fully in control of what you're doing. Everything is conscious. So there are no tics, there are no irritating, repetitive gestures or motions. Unconsciousness doesn't work very well on stage. You're being looked at by a lot of people. It's one of the reasons why I love speaking on stage, because it's rare that I'm that conscious in life. And when you are in front of thousands of people, you better be conscious.
We're receiving quite a few more questions and comments about how do I get people to listen to me? How do I get an audience that isn't listening to listen to me? And this question in particular, I like this one. It's how do I get someone who's in a position of power, whether they're in management at my company, to listen to me?
Well, obviously, as I said, you always speak into a listening. And there'll be a couple of aspects to this. Those people will be time poor, busy, and so forth. So a very good tip is to make a contract with them. Rather than launching into speaking when they may not be available really, is to say, is now a good time? Can I have 5 minutes of your undivided attention? If the answer is no, when would be a good time? So making an appointment, having a contract with the person to have their attention is a good reason. If they say why, then you'd need to have an answer there. I've got something really important to communicate, and I think it's going to be significant for our profit.
Mm-hmm. I think that's
so
great advice.
There's a reason for them to listen. So give them a reason and make an appointment, and you will be much more successful than, boss, can I have a word? That kind of thing, which may not work very well.
And again, context plays a role, time and place.
Absolutely. Context is so crucial. So you're having that little contract of, have you got 5 minutes? Can I have your attention? Mm-hmm. I've got something important to say to you, but I need your attention, your full attention. It is pretty rare, as I said in the talk, it's rare that people give you full attention. So you can ask for it. And then they kind of, full attention. Right. Okay.
Well, Julian, we knew this time would go quickly, and unfortunately we're at time. Everyone, thank you so much for joining us. You can find more information about Julian Treasure by visiting our speakers page on Toastmasters.org. I'm eager to see all of you again tonight at the Hall of Fame. Please visit the agenda found on the Toastmasters International website for details. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful day. And thank you again so much, Julian Treasure.
Thank you. Hope to see many of you at the webinar. Cheers.